Welcome to World Modeler. This is quick study number 1, Basic Decision Modeling. I'll be taking you through a demonstration of how to do basic decision modeling in World Modeler. I'll encourage you to follow along in our quick study guide number 1, shown here, called World Modeler, Basic Decision Modeling. So let's begin. I have a World Modeler shortcut on my desktop that you can see here. You can start World Modeler from the program menu or just by double-clicking on your own shortcut on the desktop. It'll start with a splash screen, which you can exit from by left-clicking, and this is the World Modeler screen. There's another video that takes you on a tour of the World Modeler main screen. It's got 5 main parts, and I'll encourage you to take a look at that video to learn what those parts are. So let's just start creating a model. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to rename the model diagram. Now, the model diagram is a space in which we create a 2-dimensional version of a model, and this is really our authoring canvas as opposed to the 3-dimensional view, which is where we run a model simulation. We're going to start by changing the name of this model diagram. I've left-clicked on it. I'm going to left-click a second time to highlight it so that I can change the name to Product Launch. The next thing I'm going to do is to create an outcome attribute. Now, underneath model diagram elements are the things that you're going to be adding to the model diagram. The word element just refers to anything you might see anywhere within a model, whether it's a diagram or a 3D window or an intermediate or an external. One kind of element is what we call an attribute. One kind of attribute is what we call an outcome. So an outcome is created in a model diagram by dragging it from this model diagram elements panel across to the screen. You can see it comes out with the name highlighted, so I can just change the name of this outcome to profit margin just by typing on my screen. The next thing I'll do in this very simple model is create a lever. Now, in general, a lever is something that you can change, something that you have control over. We tend to put levers around the left-hand side of the screen so that we can see the flow from things that you can change across to the right-hand side of the screen, which is where we keep these outcomes, the things that you care about. I'll name this first lever. I'll call it Cost. And let's have a second lever, which we'll call Revenue. Now, these aren't great examples of levers, because usually we can't directly control our costs and revenues, but just for this simple model, this will do. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a formula. I'm going to say how profit margin should be calculated based on the cost and also based on the revenue. There's a few different ways to create a formula, but what we'll do here is we'll hover over profit margin, and when I do that, you can see these icons light up on the right-hand side of the box. For now, we're going to use the formula icon, which is an F and then X inside parentheses. And I'm just going to left click on that, and then I'm going to go to New Formula. This will open up a dialog that lets me add that formula called the Formula Edit dialog. So for now, we're just going to type a very, very simple formula. I'm going to type revenue minus cost. My profit is my revenue minus cost. What you can see happening is as I'm typing, it's auto-completing that. There's only one attribute named revenue, and so it's allowing me to save a little bit of typing. If I hit the Tab key, it'll auto-complete with a highlighted box. I'll say revenue minus cost, and what you can see is as I type just the COS, there's a few different choices that I can highlight, and I can pick one of those by using the arrow keys on my keyboard. I'm pressing the up and down arrow key, and I'm going to select cost and then hit the Tab key. I'm going to click the All button on the Run context box. That will turn it blue, and then we'll click OK to exit the formula. So now we've created a formula inside profit margin. You can actually see this formula here in the model browser. Now, there's other ways to also display it in the model diagram, but I'm not showing those here today. So the next thing I'm going to do is to add what are called dependency lines. Now, these are purely decorative, just to help us understand how information flows in the model. In some models, you might choose to add dependency lines to show how information flows. In some models, you might not. But really what matters are those formulas that we created that determines how information flows from one part to the next. So again, I'm going to hover over one of these attributes, and you can see I have these 4 icons again. This time we're going to go to the arrow icon, that is the dependency line. I'm going to left click and hold the button down, and what this does as I drag the mouse to the right is it just creates a little arrow between cost and profit margin. And what that says is that we calculate our profit margin in part based on our cost. I'm going to use the same procedure to create an arrow from revenues to profit margins as well. And as you rearrange these attributes, you can see that the lines kind of try to keep in smart places so that it looks good on the screen. So let's rearrange things a little bit more. I'm going to left click on profit margin and move it a little closer to cost and revenue. That's going to help with our layout in a moment. So I'm getting ready to run a model simulation, but before I do that, I'm going to just add a little bit of decoration to my 3D view that we'll see in a moment. I'm going to go to my model browser, and I'm going to minimize the add window so you can see the whole model browser. This is really the kind of definitive source of everything that's part of my model. Everything else really that we show on the screen is different visualizations of what's in the model browser. One of the things in the browser is a folder that contains diagrams, and as you can see, this product launch decision diagram is the one diagram in that folder. I'm going to right click on product launch and say edit properties. And this allows you to make a number of changes to the model diagram, but for now we're just going to do one thing. I'm going to say click to select a new image. And I've put an image on my desktop called the barrier reef, which I think would make a pretty good model background. We'll see if it's got too much contrast or not. Other changes you can make involve the font that's used to display these tags. I guess, why not? Why don't we make the tags a little bit bigger so that we can see them a little more clearly? Say OK now. Now that was configuring the 3D view. So we're going to open up the 3D view now. So let me open up the add window. Now there's two places I can do this. There's a 3D run diagram button here. There's also one under the run tab that I'll show you that has exactly the same functionality. So the way we take a 2D diagram and kind of rotate it such that it becomes a simulation is we press the 3D run diagram button. And now I have a 3D view of that same model. See, it has the same attributes, cost, revenue, and profit margin. But it's in a three-dimensional view now. And the way we can see that, and I'll encourage you to take a look at another guide that will tell you kind of how to navigate around this 3D view, how to fly around it. But just very simply, I'm going to put my mouse on the left-hand side of the screen and left click, and I'm going to drag. And as I drag, you can see I can rotate in a few different dimensions. So what I like to do is kind of make this a little bit flatter than it comes out by default. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push down on the mouse wheel, and World Modeler really works best if you go out and spend $10 at Office Max, get a mouse that has a wheel in the middle. If I hold that button down, it actually, the wheel down, it actually acts as a second button, and I can drag around and reposition my little model that I've built here. The third thing I'll show you is I can roll the wheel, and as I roll the wheel, you can see I'm zooming in on this model. And really, this is a simulation model. If I change the cost, look at that, my profit margin is changing as well. And it's just calculating. In this case, it's a very, very simple function. But in general, those expressions can be extremely complex functions that might come from predictive analytics, that might come from a mathematical expression, or they can even be C# code. I can have if statements and whiles and other kinds of code elements in there as well. So the next thing we're going to do is add some very simple time simulation. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my 2D view. If you recall, the two-dimensional view is where I edit models. The three-dimensional view is where we simulate them. So we're going to do a couple of edits to add some simulation behavior to this model. So we're going to add some timer functionality to this simulation, and we're going to do this by adding a new formula to profit margin. There's a few different ways of doing that. The way we'll do it today is I'm going to left click on the f of x, and you can see I have this ability to add a second formula to this box, but also to edit my old formula, which I had called new formula 1. So let's edit a new formula. And this time, instead of having this run context of all, change it to a run context of timer. Then I'd like you to type revenue, and I'll hit the tab key to autocomplete, revenue plus 1. Okay, what's going on here? What this says is that every time a timer increases, every time time advances, and that might be every day or every week, well, every simulated day or every simulated week, we're going to run a new calculation. Specifically, we're going to calculate what revenue minus 1 is. We're going to calculate the value of this expression, and then we're going to store that number into the profit margin value. So I'm going to say OK, and now we have two formulas that are inside profit margin. We've got the new formula 1, the first one we created, and also new formula 2. So let's make another edit to this diagram before we look at the 3D view and run a simulation. I'm going to add another new formula to cost. And remember, the way I add a new formula is I left click on the f of x, and then I say new formula. And this time I'm going to say cost gets the value cost plus 2. And again, we're going to make this a timer formula by clicking on the timer bar here. So what does that do? Every time that the timer ticker increases, every time it's a new increment of the timer, and you'll see how that works in a moment, we're going to say, what's cost? Well, maybe it's 110. We're going to add 2 to it. Maybe now it's 112. And then we're going to take that new value, the 112, and we're going to put it back into cost. So really what's happening here is we're calculating the value of this expression, and then we're storing that new value of the expression inside of this cost attribute. So cost will have a new value of 112. At the next timer increment, we'll take the 112, we'll add 2 to it to get 114, and now cost will be 114. So every time around the timer loop, we'll add 2 to the cost, and we'll see how that looks in a second. So I'm going to click OK to exit the formula edit dialog. And I guess I'll show you again, we have now a few formulas. We've got something called the initializer, which was the name that cost automatically got when we created a lever. And then we have this new formula 1, and then the two formulas that we created on profit margin. So I'll close that up. Now I'm going to press the 3D run diagram button. Actually, let me exit the other 3D run diagram and then press it again. And usually you need to do that just to make sure that you register the changes to your model. I'm using my middle mouse button again to zoom and to click and to pan, and my left mouse button to rotate a little bit here. Now we're going to run the simulation. And to do that, we're going to leave this design tab, and I'm going to click on the run tab here. And this is going to open up a window that has timer controls at the top and a data canvas at the bottom, and we'll see how to use the data canvas in a different lesson. Basically, it just tracks the value of various attributes as they change. But for now, we're going to ignore that, and I'm going to press the run button. So take a look at this and see what happens. Look, there goes cost, incrementing by 2 every timer. And what can happen is I can interactively see. Let's stop this for a second. We have cost has grown up to 742. When we subtract cost from revenue, we get this negative profit margin of 610. And you can see that the bar representing cost has grown quite considerably. So I'm going to roll my mouse button back a little bit here, and we can kind of watch it going from a distance here. I'll press the run button again, and you can see it's growing the way we told it to. So there's a really, really simple model that has just a couple of levers and one calculation, but this is really the basis for all of the models you'll be building going forward. You'll be dragging attributes from the design tab into a 2D model diagram, and then you'll use the 3D visualization here in basic modeling, in the out-of-the-box modeling. Now we also have custom visualizations as well as cloud and form-based visualizations. But for now, this is how we'll be doing our basic modeling. The last step I'd like to show you is how to save that model. I'm going to say Save As, and I'm going to save this model on my desktop. I'm going to call it QR1, dot, and you don't have to say dot world model, or if you say save, it'll just append that. And thank you very much. Our next lesson will get into more details of how we go about creating a little bit more sophisticated model than this one.